When 8-year-old Eddie told Elvis, "I can dance better than you," in front of 300 people, there was nothing but innocent excitement in his little heart. But Elvis's gracious response in that moment would create a scene that those 300 people in the auditorium would never forget. Eddie Martinez was an extraordinary 8-year-old boy whose entire world revolved around the captivating rhythm and soul-stirring music of Elvis Presley. Living in the charming small town of Graceland Heights, Mississippi, he spent countless hours in his modest bedroom, spinning around with pure joy and practicing intricate dance moves while Elvis's timeless songs played on his mother's vintage record player. The room had been transformed into a shrine of devotion. Elvis posters covered every available inch of the walls, creating a colorful mosaic of the king's most iconic moments, while a carefully curated collection of vinyl records stood stacked neatly in the corner like precious treasures, and even a small replica of Elvis's famous white jumpsuit hung prominently in his closet. The young boy had dedicated himself to memorizing every single twist, every hip shake, every finger point, and every signature move that made the king of rock and roll the legendary performer he was known to be worldwide. Eddie would spend countless hours watching grainy black and white footage on their old television set, rewinding the same electrifying performances over and over again until he could mirror every gesture with absolute perfection. His dedication was truly remarkable for someone so young and innocent. He would practice relentlessly until his small legs ached with exhaustion, and his voice grew hoarse from singing along passionately to the records that played on endless repeat throughout their house. His fascination with Elvis wasn't merely casual admiration or a passing childhood phase. It was pure, unbridled devotion that bordered on what adults might call obsession, though in Eddie's case it was simply the innocent love of a child for his hero. Eddie would study old television performances with the focused intensity of a dedicated scholar, carefully copying Elvis's iconic leg movements and spending hours trying to perfect that famous, irresistible lip curl that had captivated millions of fans around the world. He maintained notebooks filled with detailed drawings of Elvis's different outfits, each costume sketched with the careful attention of an artist, and he could recite the lyrics to every single song from memory, his young voice carrying the emotion and passion that made each song special. His mother, Maria, a hard-working woman with gentle eyes and infinite patience, would often find him standing in front of the bathroom mirror, carefully slicking back his dark hair with water until it gleamed, pretending with complete seriousness that he was performing at the legendary Grand Ole Opry or on the famous Ed Sullivan Show. She couldn't help but smile with motherly pride at her son's unwavering dedication and pure passion, though she sometimes worried about his naturally shy nature when it came to performing in front of others, especially strangers who might not understand his deep love for music. At family gatherings and social events, Eddie would instinctively hide behind her legs when well-meaning relatives asked him to show off his carefully practiced Elvis moves, his confidence seeming to evaporate the moment he felt the weight of expectant eyes upon him. The contrast between his private confidence and public shyness was quite stark and noticeable. At home, within the safety of his own room, he was a miniature rock star who commanded his imaginary stage with natural charisma, but around strangers or in unfamiliar environments, he became quiet, reserved, and almost invisible. The life-changing opportunity that would alter Eddie's entire world forever came in the form of an official school talent show announcement that appeared prominently on the bulletin board outside his third-grade classroom, when his beloved teacher, Mrs. Henderson, a kind woman with silver hair and encouraging smile, mentioned enthusiastically that the annual talent competition was rapidly approaching and actively encouraged all students to participate and showcase their unique abilities. Eddie's dark eyes immediately lit up with a possibility he had never dared to imagine before. The colorful poster, displayed in bright, eye-catching letters, promised exciting prizes for the best performances and cordially invited families to attend what would undoubtedly be the biggest, most anticipated event of the entire school year. For weeks leading up to this momentous announcement, Eddie had been secretly practicing his elaborate Elvis routine in the privacy of his bedroom, perfecting every single move until he could perform the entire sequence flawlessly without a single mistake. He had created an entire choreographed performance from scratch, complete with dramatic entrances and carefully planned exits, each movement precisely timed to match the rhythm and emotional crescendos of his favorite Elvis songs. This talent show represented his golden chance to show everyone what he could do, to transform himself from the quiet, unassuming kid who typically sat in the back of the classroom into someone truly special and memorable. At home that evening, as the warm glow of sunset filtered through their kitchen window, Eddie approached his mother with an unusual display of confidence, his small hands trembling slightly with barely contained excitement. "Mama, I want to be Elvis in the talent show," he declared with determination, his small chest puffed out with newfound courage and resolve. The words tumbled out in an excited rush, as if he was genuinely afraid he might lose his nerve if he didn't speak quickly and decisively. Maria looked at her typically reserved son with surprise and wonder, immediately noting the bright spark of ambition and hope in his dark eyes that she had never witnessed before in all his 8 years. She had been a silent witness to his private performances countless times, watching from the doorway with quiet pride as he transformed into his beloved idol within the complete safety and comfort of his bedroom sanctuary. But performing in front of the entire school, hundreds of parents, teachers, classmates, and community members was an entirely different challenge altogether, one that would require courage he had never had to summon before. The school auditorium could comfortably hold nearly 300 people, and Eddie had never performed for an audience larger than his own reflection in the mirror. However, something profound and determined in Eddie's eyes told her this was important to him in a way she had never seen before, and she knew instinctively that she had to support his dream completely. Together, they embarked on the exciting project of creating the perfect Elvis costume, a mission that became their shared obsession over the following weeks. Maria spent countless evenings after her exhausting job at the local diner, carefully and lovingly sewing hundreds of tiny sequins onto a white jumpsuit she had discovered at a thrift store on the outskirts of town. Each individual sequin was placed with meticulous care and artistic precision, creating intricate patterns that caught and reflected light, just like Elvis's famous, dazzling stage outfits that had captivated audiences worldwide. She even managed to find small, genuine rhinestones that she arranged in elaborate, beautiful designs across the chest and sleeves, transforming the simple jumpsuit into something truly magnificent. Meanwhile, Eddie practiced his routine with increasing intensity, focus, and unwavering determination. He would spend countless hours perfecting his moves with scientific precision, making absolutely sure that every gesture captured the very essence and spirit of his idol perfectly. He practiced his signature lip curl religiously in the bathroom mirror, worked tirelessly on his hip movements in the spacious living room, and rehearsed his dramatic arm gestures while walking to school each morning. The anticipation built steadily day by day as the talent show approached, creating a mixture of excitement and nervous energy that seemed to electrify their entire household with palpable anticipation. On the momentous night of the performance, the school auditorium buzzed with an energy and excitement that seemed to vibrate through the very walls of the building itself. Parents and family members filled every available seat, many arriving early to secure the absolute best views for their children's precious moments in the bright spotlight. Cameras flashed constantly like lightning as families captured memories, and the air was thick with anticipation and the delicious scent of fresh popcorn being sold enthusiastically in the crowded lobby by parent volunteers. Backstage, which was really nothing more than a converted classroom behind the stage, Eddie stood proudly in his sparkling white jumpsuit, his dark hair perfectly styled with enough strong gel to withstand a hurricane. The hundreds of sequins on his magnificent costume caught the harsh fluorescent lights, creating thousands of tiny sparkles that danced magically across the walls like stars. He was experiencing a complex mixture of nerves and excitement that made his stomach flutter like butterflies performing their own elaborate aerial dance routine. Other children bustled around him constantly, some practicing their last-minute routines with nervous energy, others peeking through the heavy curtains to spot their families and friends in the packed audience. As he waited patiently for his turn to perform, Eddie could hear the other talented performances through the thin curtain that separated backstage from the main auditorium. There were singers whose voices warbled with understandable nervousness, dancers whose shoes tapped rhythmically against the wooden stage floor in complex patterns, and even a young magician who drew gasps and enthusiastic applause from the audience with his impressive card tricks and classic rabbit-from-a-hat routine. Each performance seemed more polished and professional than the last, and Eddie couldn't help but wonder anxiously if his Elvis impersonation would truly measure up to the incredible talent being displayed by his classmates. With each act that took the stage, his anticipation grew stronger and more intense, building like pressure in a balloon ready to burst with excitement. He closed his eyes tightly and pictured himself confidently on stage, moving gracefully to the music, just like Elvis did in all those cherished old recordings, feeling the rhythm flow through his small body like pure electricity. He imagined the audience clapping along enthusiastically, their faces lit up with joy and genuine wonder as he brought the king of rock and roll back to life, if only for a few magical, unforgettable minutes. When Mrs. Henderson finally called his name over the crackling sound system, Eddie took a deep, steadying breath and stepped confidently onto the stage. The bright, hot lights momentarily blinded him completely, but as his eyes gradually adjusted to the intensity, he could see the vast sea of faces looking up at him with expectant anticipation. For just a moment, doubt crept insidiously into his mind like a shadow, but then the familiar, comforting opening notes of "Hound Dog" began to play through the powerful sound system. Something truly magical happened as the beloved music filled every corner of the auditorium. Eddie felt the rhythm take complete control of his body, and all his carefully practiced moves came naturally and effortlessly. He swiveled his hips with confidence, pointed his finger dramatically, and moved across the stage with the natural charisma of someone much older and more experienced. The audience began to respond positively, clapping along enthusiastically and cheering loudly as the young boy brought Elvis's infectious energy to vibrant life. But then, in a moment that would become absolutely legendary in their small town's history, something completely unexpected occurred that would change everything. As Eddie was mid-performance, striking one of Elvis's most famous poses with perfect precision, a sudden commotion started mysteriously in the back of the auditorium. Whispers spread through the crowd like wildfire, and people began turning in their seats to look with curiosity toward the entrance. Eddie continued dancing with complete focus, unaware of the growing disturbance, but the energy in the room had shifted dramatically and noticeably. Parents were standing up throughout the audience, some pointing excitedly toward the back, others reaching frantically for their cameras with trembling hands. The buzz of excitement grew progressively louder, threatening to completely overshadow Eddie's heartfelt performance entirely. Then, as if emerging from the most incredible dream imaginable, a tall figure emerged slowly from the shadows at the back of the auditorium. Tall and commanding, dressed in an iconic black leather jacket with perfectly styled dark hair, the unmistakable silhouette of Elvis Presley himself began walking deliberately down the aisle. The crowd erupted instantaneously into a mixture of gasps, screams, and thunderous applause that seemed to shake the very foundations of the small school building. Eddie, still completely focused on his performance, didn't immediately notice what was happening behind him in the audience. He was lost entirely in the music, completely absorbed in bringing his idol's spirit to vibrant life on stage. It wasn't until he heard his name being called from somewhere in the audience that he turned around, and what he saw nearly made his small heart stop beating entirely. There, walking toward the stage with that famous, irresistible smile, was Elvis Presley himself. Eddie's mouth fell open in shock, and for a moment, he forgot how to breathe properly. This couldn't possibly be real. His hero, the king of rock and roll, was actually here, in his humble school auditorium, watching him perform. Elvis climbed the steps to the stage with graceful, confident ease, his commanding presence immediately capturing the attention of every single person in the room. He approached Eddie with genuine warmth in his eyes, and the young boy felt as though he was living in the most incredible dream imaginable. The music had stopped completely, but the energy in the room was absolutely electric with anticipation. "Well, well," Elvis said, his voice carrying that familiar Southern charm that had captivated millions of fans worldwide. "I heard there was a young man here who could dance just like me." He knelt down gracefully to Eddie's level, bringing himself eye to eye with the completely star-struck boy. "What's your name, son?" Eddie's voice came out as barely a whisper. "Eddie, sir. Eddie Martinez." His hands were shaking visibly, not from nervousness but from pure, overwhelming excitement. He couldn't believe this was actually happening. Elvis smiled warmly and stood back up, looking out at the captivated audience before returning his attention to Eddie. "Well, Eddie Martinez, I've been watching you from back there, and I have to say, you've got some pretty impressive moves." The crowd cheered enthusiastically at Elvis's words, but he raised his hand for quiet. "But you know what? I think we should find out who really dances better. What do you say?" In that moment, with hundreds of eyes watching intently and his childhood hero standing right beside him, Eddie felt a surge of pure childhood confidence. The nervousness melted away completely, replaced by the kind of fearless enthusiasm that only children possess. He looked up at Elvis, his eyes sparkling with mischief and excitement. "I can dance just as good as you," Eddie declared boldly, his small voice carrying clearly across the silent auditorium. The audience held its collective breath, unsure of how the king would respond to such a bold challenge from an 8-year-old boy. But Elvis's reaction was not what anyone expected. Instead of being offended or dismissive, his face broke into the widest, most genuine smile anyone had ever seen. He threw back his head and laughed with pure delight, a sound that filled the auditorium with warmth and joy. "Is that so?" Elvis asked, his eyes twinkling with amusement. "Well then, Eddie Martinez, I think it's time we settled this once and for all." He turned to the person operating the sound system. "Could you start that music over from the beginning?" What happened next would become the stuff of legend in their small town. As the opening notes of Hound Dog began to play once again, Elvis and Eddie stood side by side on the stage. But instead of competing against each other, something beautiful began to unfold. Elvis started with his signature moves, but he performed them slowly, exaggerating each motion so that Eddie could follow along. The young boy, still in shock but determined to keep up, began copying every movement. When Elvis swiveled his hips, Eddie swiveled his. When Elvis pointed to the crowd, Eddie pointed too. When Elvis did his famous leg shake, Eddie shook his small leg with all the enthusiasm he could muster. The audience was mesmerized. Here was the king of rock and roll, one of the most famous people in the world, taking time to dance with a child who had dared to challenge him. There wasn't a dry eye in the auditorium as people witnessed this incredible display of kindness and humility. But Elvis wasn't finished. As the song continued, he began to let Eddie take the lead. He would watch what the boy did, and then copy his movements, reversing their roles completely. When Eddie added his own little spin to a classic Elvis move, the king would incorporate it into his own routine, nodding approvingly and giving the boy encouraging smiles. The magic of that moment wasn't just in the dancing, it was in the connection between a superstar and a child who admired him. Elvis wasn't just performing, he was teaching, encouraging, and celebrating the passion he saw in Eddie's eyes. He recognized something special in the boy's enthusiasm and wanted to nurture it rather than overshadow it. As the song reached its climax, Elvis surprised everyone once more. He stepped back and gestured for Eddie to take center stage. "Show them what you've got, partner," he said, and the young boy, now filled with confidence beyond his years, performed his routine with more energy and joy than ever before. The crowd erupted into the loudest applause of the evening, but it wasn't just for the performance, it was for the incredible kindness they had witnessed. Parents wiped tears from their eyes as they watched their children's faces light up with wonder. Teachers marveled at the lesson in humility and generosity that had just played out before them. When the music finally ended, Elvis placed his hand on Eddie's shoulder and addressed the audience. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, his voice carrying easily through the now silent auditorium, "I've performed on some of the biggest stages in the world, but I have never had a better dancing partner than Eddie Martinez here tonight." The applause was thunderous, but Elvis wasn't finished. He knelt down to Eddie's level once more and spoke quietly, though his words were picked up by the microphone. "Eddie, you've got something special inside you. Don't ever let anyone tell you that you can't do something if you put your heart into it. Keep dancing, keep dreaming, and keep being yourself." He then did something that would be talked about for generations in their small town. Elvis took off the silver chain he was wearing around his neck, a simple but elegant piece that had been a gift from his own mother, and placed it gently around Eddie's neck. "This is for you," Elvis said softly, "so you'll always remember that dreams can come true if you're brave enough to chase them." Eddie's eyes filled with tears of pure joy as he felt the weight of the chain against his chest. It was more than just a gift. It was a symbol of belief in his potential. The evening concluded with Elvis signing autographs and taking pictures with every child who wanted one, but his connection with Eddie remained special. As the crowd began to disperse, Elvis spent a few more minutes talking with Eddie and his mother, sharing stories about his own childhood and encouraging the boy to keep pursuing his passion for music and dance. Years later, Eddie would often tell the story of that magical night to his own children and grandchildren. He would describe how a simple school talent show turned into the most incredible experience of his life, not because he met a celebrity, but because he learned about the power of kindness, encouragement, and believing in yourself. The silver chain that Elvis gave him became Eddie's most treasured possession, and he wore it every time he performed throughout his life. He went on to become a successful dancer and choreographer, always crediting that one special evening as the moment that changed everything for him. The story of Eddie and Elvis became part of the town's folklore, passed down through generations as an example of what can happen when kindness meets opportunity. It reminded everyone that sometimes the most powerful moments in life aren't the ones we plan for, but the ones that surprise us with their simple beauty and profound impact. In the end, Eddie never forgot Elvis's words about chasing dreams and being brave enough to pursue them. The 8-year-old boy who once declared he could dance just as well as the king of rock and roll grew up to understand that the real gift that night wasn't the chance to dance with his hero. It was the lesson that heroes are made not just by their talents, but by their hearts.